Salt on her lipstick, secrets in the harbor. Marinas don't sleep, they drift. After the last charter slips out past the breakwater and the yacht club extinguishes the lanterns above its porch, the whole basin lowers its voice to the pitch of pumps and ropes. Halyards tick against masts like cutlery in a drawer. Diesel breath lingers where somebody came in hot and apologized with their wallet. The night belongs to through hulls and shore power, to bilge alarms that think in syllables and nav lights that never learned embarrassment. If you've stood on a dock at midnight and listened to 100 hulls breathe, you know how honest water can be. My name is Evan. On paper, I'm the harbor master for Blue Gull Marina. In practice, I'm the building's nervous system, the weather's therapist, and the person who can tell which boat just docked by the way the cleats complain. I spend my nights tending the small faiths, gallons per minute, amps across a tired pedestal, gate logs that hum with the comings and goings of people who prefer the dark. I keep a key to every lock, a note about every captain, and because I'm not a monster, a stash of good coffee for the security guys who have to pretend to be bored. I married Lena on a Wednesday because we liked stealing nice things from the middle of the week. City Hall, a clerk whose smile had the economy of a not well tied, a pair of rings that didn't try too hard. She wore a white blazer with pockets deep enough to hide a coastline. I wore a suit that forgave my shoulders. We split a canned espresso on the steps and kissed around the aluminum rim. It tasted like speedboats and bad decisions. She designs interiors for boats, the kind of cabins that make a person consider leaving their apartment to the houseplants and moving into 300 square feet of teak and gossip. Lena talks about light the way sailors talk about wind. It wants to come from here, she says, touching air above a bulkhead and somehow convincing it to obey. We lived above a bait shop that closed at dusk and woke at dawn like a penitent. Our stairwell smelled faintly of rope and coffee. Some nights I came home at 4, smelling like salt and polite panic, and found her at the kitchen counter in one of my shirts, a pencil behind her ear and sawdust caught in her hair. She'd sit on the counter, bare thigh to cool laminate, tug me closer by the belt, and kiss me like she was signing off on a drawing. She liked when I set my mouth in the hollow where throat begins to consider voice and breath there, slow, until whatever electricity she'd been carrying agreed to change jobs. I liked the way she said my name when she wasn't using it to tell me what to fix. The first odd thing came packaged as boredom. Doc L, private slips behind the yacht club, blinked a partial gate bypass at 01:13 on a Tuesday. A badge number belonged to no one. The sensor registered 2 seconds of obedience to a key that doesn't exist and then, as if embarrassed, logged compliance. At the same time, the shore power monitor on slip recorded a draw spike like a phone sucking greedily at a charger. L14 belongs to a couple in Bermuda until October. The dock camera saw nothing but rope shadows. I told myself a story I could live with. A maintenance guy with a bent fob, a sensor flirting with moisture. I set a flag anyway. The harbor is a body. Shallow changes mean something deeper thought about happening. 2 nights later, the same ghost key slipped the same gate. A bilge pump on L12 coughed awake and went back to pretending not to exist. The shore power pedestal for L10 hiccuped, the way a charger will when a hand brushes a cable at the wrong angle. I walked those boards with a flashlight and my unprofessional opinions. The air smelled like perfume trying to be salt. On the cleat at L12, a cleat I can tie blindfolded and call by its Christian name, there was a smear of something dark, glossy, the color of cherries with ideas. Lipstick, I thought, and hated myself for being dramatic. Our boat, lived on J8, a 32-foot cutter named Night Heron that we'd rescued from a divorce and a sunburn. I only touched her when she asked. That night I checked her anyway. The companionway hatch was locked. The lines were coiled the way I coil them, with the inside loop just a touch rebellious. On the cabin step, where no one but us would set a heel, a tiny silver bobby pin waited like punctuation. It could have been Lena's. It could have been a splinter. It could have been the universe reminding me I own a vacuum. The next day we met at the yard where she was fitting out a client's boat to look like money with good taste. We kissed with sawdust between our mouths. "You smell like epoxy," I told her. "You smell like worry," she said. "What is it about Doc L that's practicing opening?" She watched me the way a clean window watches a bird. "You're doing the thing where you pretend to be funny to avoid being a person." "What's going on at L?" I asked, "besides the usual secrets?" "Work," she said then after a breath, "and the conversation we've both almost had." "What's the modern word for it?" I asked, already standing in the doorway of an answer. "Open," she said, and let the syllable stand on its own 2 feet. "Not careless, adult, we write rules, we tell first, we keep each other first. No one who reports to you, no one paying me, condom is church, our bed is our passport, the marina is a sanctuary." "You've built drains," I said, "in case it rains." "I'm telling you the weather," she said, and she didn't lie. That's a point that never stops being a point, even when it doesn't cure anything. We wrote our treaty in our kitchen, Basil misbehaving on the sill as if it had heard rumors. We sealed it with our mouths, with her palms on my shoulders and my hand where her voice begins. Treaties make sense in the air. Most trouble happens later, when gravity asks to be seated. The morning after we signed, Doc L behaved. So did the bilges and the shore pedestals and the part of my chest that had started checking itself too often. The second morning, L coughed again. I slid a breath-thin veil of UV powder across the underside of Night Heron's companionway latch, the kind that shows up only when you ask it the right question. I traced a fingertip of the same along the stainless lip of her cockpit table, where no one sits without wanting to stay. Then, because I'm me, I changed one thing in the way I coil her dock line, trained the tail into a tiny flourish, a letter no one but a person who slept with me would see. At 2 in the afternoon, an Instagram story from a man I followed by accident slid across my phone. He was beautiful the way expensive knives are. His name was Kai Rios. Profession: sea storyteller. He shot the world like it had hired him to make it make sense. In the reflection of his sunglasses, a coil of dock line appeared, the tail making a flourish like a letter I invented last night. The building and I looked at each other. "Oh," I said to no one polite. That evening, Lena came to the staff kitchen smelling like bergamot and rain. She straddled me and took enough time to make everything worse and better. After, with her cheek against my chest and my hand cooling on her spine, she said, "Let's say it." "Kai?" I asked, and her flinch would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't mapped her nerves with their mouth. "Yes," she said. She lifted her head so I could watch her not lie. "I want the thing I said out loud. I used the word and then I used it. I won't bring it onto our boat again. I'm sorry for that part." "What time?" I asked, because that's who I am. Someone who thinks logistics can make feelings smaller. "Evan," she said, and I said, "Right," and then, "After midnight." "It doesn't matter," she said. "It matters that I told you." For a while, our treaty held. For a while, we were careful citizens of our small nation. She stayed off Dock L and off Night Heron and out of the corners of my control room. I kept my stories about UV powder to myself. We tried to sleep in the same bed and sometimes succeeded. We tried to eat dinner like people who do not live at work and sometimes remembered to chew. Then a Tuesday arrived with too much wind and not enough charity. The gate on Dock L blinked its ghost key at a moment that felt like a dare. Night Heron's latch wore a faint, smug glow when I breathed blacklight over it. On the cockpit table, a crescent of something dark sang softly to the UV. In the shadow at the base of the mast, a place that sees feet and hands and bodies only when they are not purely innocent, a hair lay like punctuation. Not Lena's shade, a stranger's. I didn't storm. The harbor doesn't respect storms that arrive with fists when knots and patience will do. I boiled water in the staff galley and burned my tongue on coffee that did nothing for me. I watched the gate logs and the shore pedestals and the bilge alarms tell their small truths. At noon, a message from Lena, "Come to the yard. Let me answer you where I can smell sawdust." She didn't lie. It was careless, she said. He asked. I made a stupid, greedy choice. I didn't ask you. I'm sorry for that. I'm not sorry that he exists in a room where I also exist. She put her hand in mine and waited while I studied what my knuckles had learned. We said the marina is a sanctuary, I said. I stepped over the rope, she agreed. I won't again. We didn't explosively end. We performed immaculate logistics. She found a place 2 neighborhoods off the water, with high windows and a kitchen that a magazine could make bad choices about. We divided things like thieves with manners. She kept the kettle that complains before it sings. I kept the chipped mug that forgives my hours. On the sidewalk we kissed like diplomats, and she said, "Hate me clean if you have to." I promised to try to keep my anger stored in labeled bins. The harbor and I made up. Maybe it was only that my pulse returned to its job. Dock L behaved. Bilges whispered. The wind bragged less and did more. A regatta came and went with only ordinary injuries to pride. I learned to sleep in my apartment with the window open to the smell of pilings and bait. Nights, when the basin went quiet enough to hear a pelican rethink, I stopped listening for ghost keys. Mara entered my life like competence does, without asking permission, without embarrassing anyone. She ran the sail loft near the travel lift. If you've ever stood in a grove of stacked Dacron and felt your lungs remember childhood wind, you've been in love with a sailmaker. She tied her hair up with a bit of whipping twine because of course she did. Her hands were inked with chalk lines and needle pricks. When she laughed, a row of sewing machines appeared to remember why they hum. Most nights she smelled like canvas and hand soap. Once she smelled like oranges and rain and a sweater, and after that it was a problem. We met officially over a mainsail that had begun to confess along the bowl trope. She looked up from the bench, tapped the fabric like a doctor tapping a knee, and said, "She needs patience, not pity." I said, "Don't we all?" We went for coffee at a cart that has seen more funerals than weddings and keeps secrets for both kinds. She teased me about the way I stand on docks, heels just off the edge, as if I'm waiting for the water to make its case. The first time we kissed was not clever. It was after closing in the loft, the sails stacked like impractical books, the air full of thread, and the sound of zip ties confessing. She put her fingers in the back of my hair like she was testing a line's lay. I set my mouth where shoulder becomes neck and breath there until something thoughtful in her forgot its job. She likes to keep her eyes open when she shivers. Not because she doesn't trust me, because she wants to watch the horizon stay where she left it while the boat we are together changes course. We stopped before we used words we weren't ready to keep. She leaned her forehead against mine and said, "No boats," and I said, "No boats," and we shook on it with our mouths. We were not careful like liars. We were careful like people who fix fragile things for a living. We didn't use Night Heron. We didn't use docks or club showers or any room that came with a camera pretending to be bored. We used kitchens after hours and the office behind the chandlery with the good chair and the map no one dusts. We used our own bodies with decency. I learned that if I put my palm at the base of her throat and waited, the sound she made carried a small map of the future in it. She learned that if she pushed me back into a chair and climbed into my lap with intention, I forgot to check the gate logs for a merciful amount of time. If this needs to be a revenge story, I've lost the tape. I could have torpedoed Kai with 10 minutes of footage and a leak to the right gossip page. I could have forwarded stills to a donor who likes his morality obvious. The harbor keeps secrets for a living. Its Hippocratic oath is simple. First, do no harm to the water that carries you. Besides, Mara didn't fall in love with a vigilante. She fell in love with a man who looks at rope and thinks, what load will this bear without resenting me? Lena and I became the kind of exes people write articles about when they're trying to teach the internet manners. She stayed on Blue Gull jobs because she's very good at making salons out of cabins, and my resentment doesn't pay invoices. We texted like diplomats. She sent a Basil photo with a caption about horticultural insurrection. I sent a picture of sunlight cut into squares by a forest of masts. She wrote proud of you once and it didn't land like a trophy, it landed like a benediction. I took it. Kai came through for a shoot, of course he did, with a camera that looked like a pet and a smile he wore like jewelry. He shook my hand and said, "You run a tight harbor," as if I had given him a gift. "The tide runs it," I said, and showed him the trash barrels and the posted rules like the sermon they are. Mara walked by with a roll of sailcloth taller than some sins, and did not look at me in any way that would give anyone a moral to sell. I loved her for that more than for any particular way she undressed me with her teeth later in a room without windows. Sometimes I still wake at an hour with no name, the kind of time when the harbor exhales and the gulls are between bad decisions. In those moments, with the window open to a polite night and the smell of creosote behaving, Mara's calf thrown over my thigh like punctuation, I put my hand where her voice begins and wait for the proof that I'm forgiven for things I did and didn't do. The difference between ending and completion has a temperature. You learn it with your palm better than with your mouth. Months later, at a regatta gala thrown by people who like pretending generosity is a sport, I found myself next to Lena on the yacht club balcony. Her hair was shorter, her eyes were less busy. The water wore the lights like jewelry it didn't ask for. "Is she kind?" Lena asked, not saying Mara's name because manners are a religion where we come from. "She's specific," I said, because specificity is kindness wearing a tool belt. Lena smiled like a sketch catching a likeness. "Be good to each other," she said. "You?" I asked. "I'm learning how to let morning into rooms that don't belong to me," she said. We toasted with water. It's the only drink that never lies. Somewhere below us Kai laughed in a way that made a table forgive him. I let him own that room. I own the tide. The marina keeps being a marina. A squall will march in with too much posture and will hold boats' hands through it. A teenage deckhand will fall in love with a tender and break up with it 3 times in one shift. A retired teacher will stand at the end of Dock C holding a paper cup and stare at the horizon like it owes him a line. The bait shop will open at dawn with the dignity of a confession. Someone will tie a clove hitch that will unravel the moment they look away, and I'll fix it without a note and feel both paternal and smug. At work, I still run my fingers along the top of pedestals the way a person strokes a well-behaved animal. I talk to bilges like they're tired toddlers. I thank the wind when it mines the chart. I have not used UV powder since the day I returned the jar to the back of the drawer and told it to lie down. When Doc L blinks now, it's a bent fob on a charter mate who will come to my office, readied to apologize and bring donuts like a bribe. I accept contrition in pastry form. I am not above carbs. If you want a lesson, don't ask the water. It believes in fetch and depth and weather, not in sermons. I can tell you what I tell new captains who think rope is a metaphor. Knots are promises that can be untied and retied, but the fibers remember the first story you asked them to hold. You can't pretend a line is new when it is not. You can put chafe gear where the mostly likely harm lies. You can check the cleats twice. You can choose not to moor where the bottom is dishonest. At night, after the last headlamp winks and the harbor decides to trust the dark again, I make my rounds. Masts tick, fenders breathe. Somewhere a passing fisherman tells a story to the friend who lives permanently in his passenger seat. I stop at Night Heron and set my palm against her cabin top the way you touch the shoulder of a sleeping dog you love. Gull Harbor all secure, I say into my radio, which is really to my chest. No alarms, no bypass. The speaker crackles back a good-natured affirmation. I pocket the handset and, because I am capable of corny, wish the basin good night out loud. Then I go home, where a woman who can coax canvas into wings has left a sweater on the back of my chair and a list on my counter that says milk and remember sunscreen. In our bed, the one we refuse to call anything but ours, I put my hand where a voice begins and listen to her future breathe. Forgiveness, it turns out, isn't a verdict. It's maintenance, patient, precise, full of checks you don't brag about. You stabilize before you sand. You test before you touch. You keep records, not grudges. You learn the tide's moods. You accept that some lipstick will always taste like salt, and that some secrets belong to the harbor and not to you.